Good evening and hello. My name is Brian Sabin. I am the executive editor here at Stack, and you are tuned in to our workshop tonight with John Rusin. Tonight, John is going to be teaching you about his methods for pain-free performance and functional hypertrophy training. My name is Brian Sabin. I'd like to welcome all of you who are tuning in. Aiden from Charlotte, North Carolina, thank you for joining us here. Victoria from Maine, we're glad to see you. And even you, Dan, turning in from the UK, that's awesome. I mean, we're impressed that you are tuning in at such an early hour. Alex from Mount Vernon, Ohio, that's just down the road from us here. And I'm based in Cleveland. John's tuning in from Madison, Wisconsin this evening, where his performance center is based. We are really glad to have you all joining us this evening. Like I said, my name is Brian Sabin. Joining us shortly here will be Dr. John Rusin. Now, I'm really excited to introduce you to John because John is my next trainer. I'm very happy to report that John is going to be drawing up my next training plan. In fact, it's already drawn. And I'm really pumped to start this plan because I've seen what it can do for my colleagues. One of my colleagues, Andy, he's one of Stack's editors here, has been on John's program for more than 6 months. And the results that he's gotten while he's been on this plan are just astonishing. If you want to see something really interesting, take a look at Andy Haley. You'll see him in a lot of our videos and photos on our website. Take a look at a recent article versus one from 2 years ago or a year ago even, and you will see a very, very differently built person. And that's because of the results that he's gotten following John's programming. John's ideas on building muscle and how to build it in a functional way that'll help you become a better athlete are really interesting. They're new. I think that you are all going to come away from tonight's webinar having gained some valuable information that might change a lot about the way you program your workouts. It might change a little, but it's definitely going to change something. So you are going to be coming away from tonight's seminar feeling smarter and being able to train better because of your time here tonight. Like I said, my name is Brian Sabin. This evening, I'd like to ask that you turn off your cell phones, turn off any other windows that you have going, and give us a little bit of patience, Bob, because we will get to the recovery drills and some of the other techniques that John uses. We appreciate your excitement and asking for those. We're going to cover a lot of ground tonight, and we're going to do it in about 35 minutes. We're going to get started in about 2 more minutes here. I'm kind of waiting for the room to fill in. We went from 0 to more than 250 viewers in just a couple minutes, so we want to make sure the software gets everyone sorted out and gets everyone squared away. We also want to make sure that everyone that wants to be part of this tonight gets a chance to tune in. So we're going to give folks a few more minutes while we get things ready here. Like I said, John Rusin is a DPT. He's a PT. He's a CSCS. He's a former collegiate baseball player at University of Buffalo. He has worked with professional athletes in 9 professional sports leagues. He's worked with Olympians. He's worked with Olympic medalists and physique athletes too. So you're going to be learning from a guy who's done it. He's done it in the trenches. He's worked with athletes from every spectrum to just about every goal you could have when you set foot in a gym. So tonight, sit back, tune in, and get ready to do some learning. Along the way, if there's any questions that you have or something seems unclear, please do feel free to ping them into the box here. We're receiving all these messages that you're sending us. Brendan, this webinar is going to be about 30 to 40 minutes of presentation followed by Q&A. So we will address your questions at the end of John's presentation. So send us any questions as they come to you throughout the presentation tonight. Yeah, you are seeing our names in the introduction. You won't be seeing me or John on camera, but John is going to be showing you video clips of some of his techniques along with some other really great helpful info. Thanks everyone for tuning in. I think we are now clear to start. It is 7:35. So without any further ado, I would like to turn things over to the one, the only, Dr. John Rusin.
Brian, thanks for that great. Let me see here. Does that sound better? There we go.
Sound good.
That sounds good, Brian. That was an amazing intro. It was a little long-winded, but I like hearing people talk about me, so that was amazing. Thank you. Guys, I want to thank you all for tuning in on a Tuesday night. I know some of you are overseas. It's in the middle of the night right now, tuning into this webinar. And I want to review my systems that I've used in the last 10 years of my performance practice. And really, we've coined it as the pain-free hybrid performance method, or as many of you have seen across social media, the functional hypertrophy training method. And basically what we're going to do today is we're going to do three things. We're going to have you leaving this webinar knowing my 6-phase dynamic warm-up sequencing and being able to literally use it tomorrow for you and your athletes. The second thing that we're going to get into is the sexier of the subjects, and we are actually going to talk about strength and performance hypertrophy programming. And for many athletes out there and for many coaches, hypertrophy is something that oftentimes gets neglected, but we're going to show you how to intelligently place it into your performance programs for your athletes, your clients, and even for the general fitness population to get the very most out of your training. The last thing, I know we already got a question about the recovery stuff, is we're going to actually go through the recovery process and a couple simple tools that you can start implementing right away on the tail end of your training days, but also in secondary recovery days in order to recover quicker so you can train harder and more frequently. So before we get started with the content, I got to give a shout out to my family here. This is my wife, Lindsay. This is my daughter, Maddie, who is 7. And this is my little son, Cameron, who is 1.5 years. So I actually had to send them out. They are at dinner right now at the Cheesecake Factory just so we can do this webinar without any babies crying or dancing going on to Dancing with the Stars in the floor above. So shout out to them before we get started. And another thing before we get started is that I am very lucky to be here with all of you tonight. My career has brought me amazing places. It's brought me the opportunities to work with some great athletes and work alongside some innovators in the field. So I always say that your long-term worth, no matter if you're a coach, if you're a trainer, if you're a rehab pro, it's the impact that you leave on your colleagues, your peers, your clients, and your raving fans that you get throughout your career. You know, one of those who have been on this Stack webinar series is Dr. Stuart McGill, one of my early mentors, and being able to make a dent in his programming personally, and also the work that he does with his clients, was a very humbling moment. You know, a second person is the LA Lakers strength coach, Dr. Tim Francesco. Working with him in these last couple of years has been amazing because he is truly working with some of the best athletes in the world and using some of our methods. And of course, the clients, I would say the clients and the people that you're working with on a day-to-day basis, what the impact that you make for them, that's really what you can hang your hat on at the end of a career. And one of our clients is an ex-retired MLB All-Star, Mark Pryor, who is known for his injuries, but we actually continued working with him even after his playing career into his role as an executive in the San Diego Padres organization. So my background, I like to say that I am a human performance specialist. I am a doctor of physical therapy, as Brian said in the intro. I'm also a certified strength and conditioning specialist, but we work to really bridge those two things together to try to bring the very best in pain-free programming. So I'm the owner of John Rusin Physical Therapy, which is located in Madison, Wisconsin. Also John Rusin Fitness Systems, which is our performance platform, which is also in Madison. drjohnrusin.com, which is our website. And we work as athletic performance and fitness consultants all around the world. And we've had the opportunity to go to 4 different continents and teach our methods in the last 3 years. And in between all of those trips, I've also written almost 300 articles in the fitness industry, some on Stack Media right there. So that's been a lot of content over the last couple of years that has really formulated the stuff that I'm going to go over with you guys today. So my career started as a ex-Division I scholar athlete. As many strength coaches and PTs out there, I was chronically banged up and always hurt, leading to my first job as a strength and conditioning coach in the collegiate and high school sector. From there, went on to physical therapy while working as a strength coach. And over the course of the last 9 years of my professional career, I've worked with many, many top athletes, including medalists in the London in the most recent Rio Games, all-world Ironman athletes, IFBB pros, the bodybuilders, powerlifters, and really the last 2 to 3 years, we've really been keying in on the general fitness population and people that just truly want more out of their bodies, out of their performances, and they're willing to put in the mental and physical effort to get, really world-class results. And that's really where the performance programming that we're going to go over today lies. So to get to that first value bullet point, I want to start off with something that every single training session, no matter if you are an Olympic level athlete or you are somebody with the goal of losing 50 pounds to be healthier and move better, every single training session needs to start with a proper dynamic warm-up sequence. And I like to break mine down into 6 unique phases here. If you can hit upon all 6 of these phases, you are truly putting in a very, very complete program that is used to not only enhance your performance in the gym, but also prevent injuries. And preventing injuries in the gym, along with the field, is the number one thing that we should be worrying about if we're athletes, coaches, or rehab pros. That's our number one focus. So quickly to go through these, we're going to touch in a little bit more depth here in a second, but the first phase, we're going to work on self-myofascial release techniques, most popularly known as like foam rolling or using the lacrosse ball on your tissues. Next one, we're going to work through some stretching. Third phase, we're going to go into corrective exercises. Fourth phase, stability and activation drills. Fifth phase, we're going to start working on the foundational movement pattern development to try to really hone in on improving the big foundational movements. And the last one, we are going to rev up the central nervous system, stimulate it, and get it ready for some optimal performance on the big lifts coming up. So SMR techniques, we've heard a lot about foam rolling in the last 10 years in our industry. It feels like it's a very polarizing topic because it's gone from being an absolute mandatory portion of a dynamic warm-up, something that even 10 to 15 minutes of rolling people go through, to something that people are really starting to question in these last couple of years because there's really kind of some shoddy research on the transference of foam rolling in mobility and also function. But this is the first phase of our dynamic warm-up sequence. And the thing I want you to key in on this slide is that you are going to only be spending 30 to 45 seconds on the foam roller, on the lacrosse ball, in order to work on your soft tissues. So for your coaches out there, I try to split it into 2 different kind of athletes in the ways that they would present. The first one is a dysfunctional mover, somebody that has trouble moving through patterns correctly. They struggle with foundational movement or they have pain. At that point, we want to work on acute trigger points in the tissue. What I mean by that is we are not going to be doing a pizza dough roller back and forth, 3 feet at a time on a pass, but rather we're going to be working and finding those points in the tissue that really feel terrible because they have neurological trigger points. So we're going to work 2 to 3 trigger points for only about 10 to 15 seconds a piece in the number one tissue that we're working on. So for instance, if we're working on lower body day and we have trouble getting into a hip extended position, maybe the quads would be something that we focus this acute trigger point work on. And for many of you, you have non-painful functional movers, those guys that could just do anything, all their movements look pristine. In that case, we can work mobility on top of a foam roller, meaning that we can either double up on our mobility work, or we can get in and we can actually just foam roll the tissues just like those dysfunctional movers. So after we get off the foam roller, our next step is to actually go through and use something called biphasic stretching on the exact tissues that you used with the roller. So I'm going to stick with the example of foam rolling the quads before a lower body emphasis lift day. So if we foam roll the quads, we're going to be using biphasic stretching for the quads. So everything in this dynamic warm-up 6-phase sequence, it's all going to go together. So we're not cherry picking different parts of the body. We're going to have one goal, and we're going to move towards that goal with every single phase in the sequence. So if you're wondering what biphasic stretching means, it's essentially 2 different kinds of stretches done in one single set. So the first type is a dynamic oscillatory stretch. That kind of stretch involves a little bit of movement. So if you think about oscillating back and forth about an inch of range of motion at a time, that is what we're going to be doing here for about 15 to 30 seconds. After that is done, we're going to follow up that dynamic oscillatory stretch with a static stretch, which people are really more familiar with. So we're going to be holding just an end range stretch for another 15 to 45 seconds. So going through, I'm going to show you this video here. This is one of the most effective foam stretching techniques that I've used with biphasic stretching. Because people really struggle with their posture, even some of our pro athletes, they're sitting and they're slouching over their cell phones 8 to 10 hours a day. So it's something that we want to really key in on are the anterior chain muscles. What I mean by that is the quads, the pecs, anything that brings us into a forward rounded position. So let me fast forward here a sec, and I'll show you this rear foot elevated hip flexor biphasic stretch. So in this half kneeling position, we are going to make sure that we have the hips in total neutral under us by squeezing our glutes and our adductors together. We're going to make sure the shoulders are in neutral position. And with the hips and the shoulders taken care of, we're going to place a lot of tension through the core to really stabilize that functional pillar. Once those things are set, we're going to be oscillating on and off. You can see there I went too far on the range of motion, and this one right here is just that little 1 to 2 inch of oscillation. That's really going to help the joints to lubricate, to get some motor oil in the engine there, and just to get a little bit more transference of that stretch and that mobility work here. So this is something, going back, this is something that I program for almost every single athlete and client that I have, because targeted mobility is something that most people need to work on in terms of their goals to move pain-free, but also get the best performance results possible. Moving into corrective exercise, I hate to quote myself here, but this is one good one that was said a couple of years ago to a client. The only reason to ever implement a corrective exercise into your program is so you never, ever have to do them again. It's important to realize that the only reason that we use corrective exercises is so we get a positive response, so we get better movement, we get better mobility, better stability. We have a goal for our corrective exercise practice. When it becomes habitual, we lose the training effect from the corrective exercises. So when we do place corrective exercises in, I like to prioritize only 1 to 2 corrective exercises that are based off of the evaluation that you should be doing with yourself if you're an athlete, or with your athletes if you are a coach. So knowing some of the challenges that your athletes face in terms of stability and mobility, and targeting corrective exercise directly for those, and actually seeing a positive response, that's a really, really big thing in this phase. Moving one more forward, we're going into phase 4, which is activation drills. And the difference between activation and corrective exercise here is corrective exercise works on both mobility and stability of multiple segments working at once. You almost think of corrective exercise as opening up the plasticity of your brain to move better, to move smoother, to move more effectively. Whereas activation is going to be a little bit more isolated on certain tissues that we want to key in on. The tissues that we want to place an emphasis on are the ones that play primary roles in stabilization. So using the shoulder girdle as an example, the prime mover of the shoulder girdle are the lats and the pecs, the big muscles that we all are familiar with because they're the closest to the skin and they're the ones that have the most movement through that shoulder, that glenohumeral joint. If you go on the back side of the shoulder, you have all these scapular, these shoulder blade stabilizers, and those are the ones that we're really worried about in the dynamic warm-up scheme in order to activate so we can get better movement from the prime movers. So another way you can think about it is the muscles that need to turn on and function to keep you in good posture throughout the day. So going down the back side of the body again, you look at the backs of the shoulders, you look at the glutes and the hamstrings, things that have primary roles of postural stabilization. And if those two indicators are a little bit too complicated, you can literally just break it down pretty basically to the front side of the body being the anterior chain and the posterior chain being located on the back side of the body. So in terms of activation and the drills that we're using, we really want to place a heavy emphasis on the back side of the body. And again, these should coincide with the specific drills that you're doing for your soft tissue work, for your stretching, and your corrective exercises. One of my most popular activation drills is something called the banded shoulder saver tricep. And I'll hit the video here and talk you guys through this. But this is something that we use with our athletes before they go into any big, heavy pressing-based movements like a barbell bench press or a variation of that. So we use this tricep, the first one being the banded over and back that you're seeing right now, to try to coordinate the movement of the shoulders going up into flexion and extension and trying to get into a neutral posture with all those scapular stabilizers working together. After about 10 or 12 reps, we move into the banded face pull here that really helps to activate all of the retractors of the shoulders. So the rhomboid group, the rear delts, and all of those other backside of the shoulder movements. Last one here, we're going to go into something that's going to also target the backside of the shoulders here with the banded pull apart. And again, we're looking to get a pump here. We're looking to drive blood flow into the active stabilizing tissue of the back of the shoulders, but we're also looking to lubricate the joints so they're going to be more pain-free when we get to actually moving them through the performance lifts. My favorite phase, and maybe the highest yielding phase of any dynamic warm-up sequence here, is the movement pattern development. So the movement patterns that we are really keying in on with my functional hypertrophy training platform and our pain-free hybrid performance system are the 6 foundational movement patterns that every single person should be able to execute to some extent. They're the squat, the hip hinge, single leg, which is like a lunge, upper body pushing and pulling, and then some sort of locomotion or carry. So we use this phase 5 in the dynamic warm-up sequence to actually spend the time to perfect these movement patterns. So if you have a squat programmed in your performance program for the day, your phase 5 is going to be practicing the squat. So we're not looking to get a training response from these movement patterns. What we're doing is making sure that we set up optimally, we have perfect stability and tension coming through the shoulders, the hips, and the core. We're getting down and we're working through mobility and we're getting a feel for the movement itself. So we're placing an emphasis on coaching this movement if you are a coach with your athletes, because we all know that it's very hard to elicit a training effect and also coach the movement simultaneously. So we use this phase to really start coaching these foundational movement patterns so we can start seeing the trickle-in effect of it with loaded movement later on in the program. Last one is CNS, central nervous system development. And we are trying to ingrain movements which are twitchy, high velocity, explosive movements as the last thing that you do before you get into your training. So for the upper body, we're looking at things like jacks, like seal jacks and also jumping jacks at the upper body with a really, really fast reciprocation, along with any sort of med ball throws. So we're looking at medicine ball presses, medicine ball slams, things like that, where we're really using full effort with very, very little amount of volume placed. So 1 to 2 sets of 2 to 3 reps per throw or per jack. The other thing that is more popular in our industry, because it's a little bit easier to implement, is the CNS development for the lower body. So we're thinking about things like jumps, like jacks again, and even sprinting anywhere from 10 to 12 yards at a time. So we're looking at this last phase 6 as digging us out of the parasympathetic hole of trying to correct and optimize your movement. So through the first 5 phases, we're truly just trying to practice better movement. We're working on developing techniques to try to yield better movement, like the stretching and the foam rolling. And we're using corrective strategies to try to just optimize everything. And that is very low level stuff here in terms of a training response. So the last thing that we want to do is end the dynamic warm-up session truly with a bang, with a sympathetic response, with the jumps, with the throws, and with the sprints. So this is an example of a set that we put in this phase 6. This is a seal jack here with a very, very twitchy, fast velocity movement. And then we're going right into a med ball chest press with the bent over position. So that would be an example of a CNS prep that we would do before a bench press day, before an upper body emphasis day. All right, so dynamic warm-up programming. We just spent more time talking about the dynamic warm-up than it will actually take you to get through a well-organized 6-phase dynamic warm-up sequence. So for the general fitness population, somebody that's working on maybe 1 to 2 things that are holding back their movement or their pain, we're looking at 6 to 7 minutes only for a proper dynamic warm-up. If you're really working with athletes or clients that are truly dysfunctional movers that have a ton of different movement-based deficits, you're looking at maybe 7 to 10 minutes. And even for the most painful movers, the people that are truly in rehab, they're in physical therapy, they are looking at 12 to 16 minutes only. So this is probably a shorter time period than you've heard in the past. But I'm a big believer that if you take the time and you put the emphasis on trying to major in the majors with your movement patterns and trying to optimize the things that are the biggest key players holding you back, you're going to be able to get more out of less time with your dynamic warm-up sequence. And of course, as dysfunction is more prevalent, the time is going to increase little by little. But for 99% of the athletes and the clients that I work with, they can get out within 8 minutes. And I think that should truly be a goal for everyone with their performance program. So the next section here, I want to actually talk about lifting weights, getting a training response, and even getting a pump here. So we're going to go through the functional hypertrophy training strategies for the athlete specifically. The strategies that I've had a great amount of success implementing both safely and effectively are power primer movements, smart strength and hypertrophy work that are a little bit different than the status quo, training the stretch with accentuated eccentrics to clean up movement patterns, inducing metabolic stress, aka the pump effect, even with our athletes, and programming pain-free movement variations that are individualistic fits for each and every client. The power primers has maybe been one of the most effective tools that I've used that transcends any population that you're working with in the gym. Old school theory in strength and conditioning tells you that you must do your heaviest, biggest compound movement first in your training program. While I think that there is merit to this, I've had a great amount of success placing in one power primer movement before we hit our big loaded compound movements of the day. So the power primer is going to be placed between the end of the dynamic warm-up and your pure strength movements. So this essentially serves as an extended warm-up. So it allows us to increase joint lubrication. It increases blood flow and tissue temperature. It activates even further than the dynamic warm-up, the postural stabilizing musculature that we want to be keying in on. And it improves movement efficiency and patterning that is going to carry over into the big compound lifts that are going to be after these power primers. So programming the power primer movements, they can be movements that are extended with ramp-up schemes. What I mean by ramp-up schemes is using more and more weight on every single set that you do. So say you have a movement and you know that your work sets are going to be, for 10 reps, you're going to use 100 pounds. You start at 20 pounds for the first set. You go up to 40 pounds for the second set, and you climb little by little, and we call this ramp-up scheming. So this really helps to build more volume in the program, but I like to term it pain-free volume because we're truly not loading it up to a point where the non-contractile tissues, like the joints, they don't take the brunt of the hit as they do with a little bit more heavily loaded movements. So again, we want to be working on extended ramp-up schemes, multiple working set. Really, the execution of these power primers is very important too. So we want to be working on constant tension movements. So you think about contracting a specific muscle. We want to keep that muscle contracted throughout the shortening, the concentric phase, and the lengthening phase, and really not have any pauses on either end of those movement patterns in the range of motion. So we want to be using a full range of motion and even extending the range of motion with some stretches that will really expedite the blood flow to the tissues. And anytime that we're using a little bit higher of a volume for these power primers, we want to be doing postural friendly variations, meaning that we never want to have the limiting factor of any power primer exercise being the core or being your stability through the spinal column. So we're really just trying to lower the postural stresses so we can increase the tissue stresses. So an example of these power primers for the lower body would be hamstring emphasis and glute emphasis movements. So we're thinking about something like a machine or physio ball hamstring curl, a glute bridge, a pull through, a hip thrust, and doing those movements in the schemes that we just talked about right before we head to the squat rack for any variation that you're going to be doing there. Pushing primers, we're going to really be focusing in on the upper back and those scapular stabilizers of the shoulder. So a great example of a power primer placed in before a bench press variation would be the banded face pull. And finally, like a pulling primer, we really want to place the emphasis on lats because they are one of the biggest yielding stabilizers of not only the pelvis, but some of the lumbar spine and rib cage as well. So putting in a movement like the straight arm pull down to activate the lats before deadlift not only has the ability to increase your performance in the deadlift, but actually key in on your stabilization and making it more pain-free in nature. So here's an example of something that we do directly before the deadlift. So this is off of a high cable unit using a straight arm pull down variation. So you can see here we're going up overhead, we're putting the stretch through the lats at the top of the movement, and we're allowing the hands to rotate authentically at the bottom just to maximize the flex and the squeeze that's going to activate the lats. So this is something that we use out most of the time before our deadlift variations, just because it's so well tolerated with our athletes. So considerations for smart strength here. What I mean by smart strength is not the run-of-the-mill meathead, just placing more and more weight on the barbell every single session until you get hurt. That's the polar opposite of what we want to be doing here with our strength movements. So I have 4 rules that really I live by with my programming that has really led to really pain-free results for my clients and my athletes. First one, never sacrifice your form, your technique, the tempo of the movement, and the feel of the movement to add additional load. Sometimes that's hard to place your ego aside, but this is one of the biggest things that if you go in and you intelligently program your weights, you should be able to stick to them and always have pristine technique. Second things, we need to strategize all movement variables. So as I was talking about before, a bench press 5 sets of 5 reps is not just a bench press. We have to have some sort of emphasis placed on the movement. We have to have a goal for each and every strength-based movement, whether it be exploding the bar with better explosive bar speed, or it is using an accentuated eccentric that really keys in on the lowering process. It has to have a goal in mind. Just doing strength to get strong, that usually doesn't lead to long-term orthopedic success or performance success. Rule number 3, don't only be a slave to the barbell. I know the barbell is the single most popular loading tool on the face of the earth, but smart programming knows that sometimes we can program with an eclectic approach to the training tools that we're using, because it's all about the execution of the movement no matter what tool you have. And the last rule is never miss a rep. A majority of training injuries happen when either your body hits failure and you lose form and technique, or you are pushing through to a point where you actually miss a rep and you're pressing against an immovable object, and it's literally the last straw that breaks the camel's back. So if we can avoid never missing a rep, we can stay healthy and we can move forward better than those that are grinding through ugly reps on a routine basis. So looking at the squat pattern, this is a more unique squat setup here. So this is a landmine goblet squat. So it's a variation of the front squat that's used predominantly with my clients that struggle with lower back pain during the squats. So as you can see here, the strength curve has changed a little bit on this because we're pushing back, really using our hips more in this movement, taking the stress off the spine. And really in this setup with the box, you can load multiple plates on. You can get it from the bottom up. You can get your stability at the bottom of the movement, and you can squat up a lot more well tolerated for the people that have, struggled with having a bar on their back trying to squat down. Next thing that we're going to go over is the use of accentuated eccentric. So eccentric is the lowering portion of a lift. And this is something that I've used in the past couple of years to try to work on mobility, but also build muscle and strength simultaneously. And that sounds crazy because usually you either work on mobility with kind of a fluffy corrective exercise, and then you build mass and you build strength with your big compound movements. But I've seen that accentuated eccentrics can literally kill 2 birds with 1 stone. So this is another strategy that I also use for people that struggle with really clean and crisp movement patterns. So by slowing down the eccentric of the movement, we're able to actually get more proximal stability at the core, the hips, and the shoulder that leads to better overall movement. So we're trying to extend that eccentric phase anywhere from 3 to 8 seconds per rep. So if you think about a squat, you're going to be lowering that squat from 3 to 8 seconds. So we're trying to work a little bit more time under tension here to really elicit a big metabolic stress, but also really kick in some of those growth factors. So the total time under tension for these sets, anywhere from about 1 minute to 2 minutes. And we try to sprinkle these into our programming and just add a novel stimulus on just very basic lifts, just to improve the pattern or to just give a different training stimuli to get people over plateaus safely. The muscles that we want to be emphasizing here are the hamstrings, the pecs, and the lats. And these muscles are truly habitually shortened due to postural demands of just everyday life. So placing an emphasis using the accentuated eccentrics and getting a stretch-based effect on the hams, the pecs, and the lats, it's one of the most effective things that you can do to actually gain and maintain mobility. So one of my favorite ones here is the barbell RDL accentuated eccentric. So you can see here the lowering portion of this lift, placing the stretch through the hamstrings. We're going at about 7 seconds here, and then coming back up explosively and squeezing the glutes in. So this is something that we use on the tail end of our lower body emphasis days to really just end the session with a stretch-based movement before we get out of there. So the power of metabolic stress, being a physical therapist by education, I truly don't think that metabolic stress gets the amount of attention that it should. Physical therapy is all about relearning movement patterns, and we're starting to open up our mind to actually loading movement patterns and get tissue response. But when you look at getting the best tissue response possible, metabolic stress is one of the key factors that can be implemented into basically any type of person's program, no matter their skill level or goal. And what I mean by metabolic stress is getting a skin-tearing metabolic pump through the tissues that expedites blood flow into the tissues and the muscles that are working. And it's really, it triggers a cascade of growth factors into the muscles themselves. So we can induce metabolic stress multiple different ways, but the best way and the most basic way is programming ultra high rep schemes, anywhere from 15 to 50 reps per set. And really we can use that to get some cumulative training stress in a movement pattern. We can use things like accommodating resistance to make the pump even more brutal, and even intensity techniques like inter and intra-set stretching, blood flow restriction training, and a bunch of really, really cool tools. But really, we're trying to maximize muscular stress while decreasing joint stress. That is worth mentioning again, because this is really the basis of my functional hypertrophy training platform, is we are trying to use the smartest variations possible in order to increase muscular stress responses while keeping away from any unwanted, untolerated joint stress. So when you look at programming metabolic stress, we want multiple sets. We want to be working on the rep ranges between 15 and 50 reps, using constant tension and really peaking isolated holds, really flexing the muscles hard. Short rest periods between 15 and 45 seconds to get that cumulative stress response that I was talking about previously. And again, we're using joint-friendly positions and variations that aren't going to have the core or the spinal position being the first factor that breaks in some of these extended set schemes. So we are really hitting a ton of volume here, and we just want to decrease any unwanted joint stress possible in order to make the tissue response the highest, but also to get the best pain-free response possible. So looking at this back finisher, we're looking at the fat grips on the band, and we're doing a high row variation. And you can see how I'm pumping back and forth, flexing hard at the bottom, using a full range of motion. And we are going with 50 reps here. So this is something that is truly a metabolic stress-based finisher, working the pump and getting some good blood flow into those tissues before the end of the session. So when we talk about intelligent movement variations, this is going to be 100% based off of the individual that you are working with in front of you. So every single person, I like to say, is a study of n equals 1, meaning that you must evaluate them, you must assess them, and talk about their goals and their current skill sets in order to give them the safest, most effective methods to achieve their goals, plain and simple. But some of the best things that we've used are using slight angles, meaning that we're going to use angles that are, not the traditionalist angles. When you think about a bench press being flat or the incline press being at 45 degrees, there's a very powerful response using slight angles there. Yep. Let's see here, guys. So the use of slight angles here, that's one of the biggest ones that we've used for our direct shoulder training, for our pressing, and also our pulling based movements. We can also vary hand positions and stance positions when it comes to those 6 foundational movement patterns. We can use different types of loading tools in order to get a tissue response. And we really need to be exhausting the executional details of every movement. So again, a bench press is not only a bench press. We're looking at detailed reasons and rationale between every single executional detail possible in order to have the best response. So what's an athlete's safest position? It is uncompensated proximal stability. AKA, you are going to have a strong and stable core that is a non-negotiable part of any loaded movement. So we are going to be placing that with the biggest amount of emphasis possible. So I like to teach my clients before they even leave their first session what it feels like to have maximal torque output at the shoulders and at the hips. And this is really something that when you learn to stabilize the shoulders and the hips, the 2 most mobile joints in the body, and we learn how to almost spiral those things together to gain stability, it's much easier to actually volitionally turn on the core and gain better proximal core stability. So that's one of the highest yielding skills and coaching methods that we use. An athlete's safest position is also something that just looks good. It feels good to them, and you can tell that it has the type of strong and smooth synergistic movements that's going to lead to better foundational movement pattern development, but also lay the foundation to place more and more loading over time onto these athletes. So using novel variations like a Swiss bar in this video, we have a neutral grip position here. We're also using the floor instead of the bench just to limit some of the bottom range of motion that's more well tolerated at the shoulders, and even throw in about 10 sets of chains on each side here with some accommodating resistance that deloads the bottom of the range of motion while overloading the top of the range of motion. These are the kind of things that we can start implementing with our athletes in intelligent strength program in order to have the best response without putting them in the position for chronic injury. So the pain-free sequence of training starts always with a dynamic warm-up sequence. It's followed by that power primer, going through smart strength, going into hypertrophy-based movements, anywhere from 8 to 20 reps there. Secondary metabolic stress to kind of piggyback on top of that hypertrophy work. And then we're always going to go through and make sure that we hone in on those postural dependent finishers. So we work on isometric and anti-core rotation extension and flexion exercises, and also loaded carries there. And no program really is complete without cardio and conditioning. So those also play a huge role in the overall program. So an example of scheduling, there could be 1,000,001 different ways to schedule out these types of performance programs, but we are looking at strength emphasis and hypertrophy emphasis. So going through something with a lower body, upper body push, upper body pull with the strength, and then finishing up with the upper lower body split. So last thing that we're going to be talking about here is expediting the recovery process. And this is simple because we went over a lot of these skills already. So we're looking at global SMR techniques, biphasic stretching again, catch-all flow-based mobility, and then low-intensity steady state cardio. One of my favorite is actually walking. Using this on the tail end of your let's go through these one by one quickly here. So global foam rolling is a little bit different than acute trigger point work because we're going to be working on lymphatic drainage, actually moving some of the fluid out of the extremities back into central circulation by tapping into something called the active muscle pump. And we're going to have a parasympathetic response to rest and recover here. So we're going to be using 2 to 3 minutes on each structure in the body, and really placing an emphasis on bigger relative movement under the roller, anywhere from 6 to 12 inches. So really just trying to prioritize the broad and the dense musculature of the body, the hamstrings, the quads, glutes, the pecs, really the big prime movers. And while you're doing these, deep diaphragmatic breathing strategies can really be advantageous. Biphasic stretching, we already went over. We're going to implement it back again with those same tissues, hamstrings, glutes, quads, lats, pecs, the big prime movers that we're going to follow up on. Catch-all mobility is something that's gained a lot of popularity in the last year or two. And it's truly corrective exercise and mobility drills kind of all combined into one flow-based movement that keeps you in constant motion. And you can really just target multiple areas of deficits here within one like 5 to 10 minute flow-based session. And an example of this would be like a world's greatest stretch walking flow. And you could do that for 5 movements, put all the joints in your body through a full range of motion, and really work on some great dynamic mobility. Last one that really gets no credit is low intensity steady state cardio. So things that are low impact on the joints of the body, but they also elicit a cardiorespiratory response. So it's not only healthy, but it's going to actually help you expedite the recovery process. And it's something that we've made mandatory with my athletes, especially on their off days. So we try to keep it low intensity, no matter if you want to go outside for a walk or we're looking at any piece of cardiovascular equipment, but we're looking at keeping the heart rate under 120 beats per minute, really building a cardiovascular base and tapping into the upper and lower body reciprocal pattern that really helps to really target lower back pain alleviation in people that are dealing with pain. There's 3 different ways to program these recovery workouts. The first one, the easiest one, is to place it in the post-workout window. So directly after your last set, you're going to use a 5 to 15 minute recovery program in order to bring your central nervous system back down and start the recovery process right away before even leaving the gym. The second way is a secondary recovery workout. This can be placed in the same day as your performance program, but about 4 to 6 hours after your workout. And this is something that we use with many of our clients that need a pre-bedtime routine. So they go through and they actually use this right before going to bed. Last one is a mandatory part of our programming, which is off-day programming. So we really just use it for neural recovery and systemic recovery. So all of those systems that we talked about here today, the dynamic warm-up sequencing, the functional hypertrophy training programming, and also the recovery process, this is all somewhere, and we've put it all together for you in 12 weeks of my pain-free performance system in action. About a year ago, we released something called Functional Hypertrophy Training, which is a 12-week program, and it's an educational resource for trainers, for coaches, for fit pros and rehab pros that brings you through the very best methods that I've been writing about, that I've been speaking about, and coaching some of the best coaches in the world with in the last 3 years, and really brings it all together in one place that you can actually follow along with and actually get results while you're educating yourself. So it's about 120 pages of a continuing education resource with over 200 videos and over 70,000 words of my personal coaching notes and methods. So it's something that if you want to learn more about the dynamic warm-up sequencing or our FHT model or how to implement correct recovery strategies, it's done for you right in this 12-week program. And tonight being on the webinar, because it is a Tuesday night at 7:30, now 8:30, I want to give you guys a coupon code that only you guys get for being on this webinar. So if you enter in STACK, S-T-A-C-K, on the checkout page, that will bring $25 off this program. And it's something that this is as cheap as we've ever sold it at. So it's a great deal. And I'd love to add you all to my FHT family, which is an exclusive coaching group that is open on Facebook when you do join this program that has 600 fitness professionals all learning and coaching together. And it's something that I put a majority of my coaching notes and my emphasis on social media into this platform. So that alone, having 600 fellow coaches to learn from, it's worth the program in addition to actually getting jacked and feeling good in the process of 12 weeks too. So make sure you head over to the link that we have on the page, but also you can click the link on the right side of the screen as well if you want to check more out about that. But I think we are going to be taking some questions from Brian. I know we have a lot to get after, and I am here for you guys, so let's get after it.
All right. Well, John, thank you so much for that presentation, and thank you everyone that's tuned in time with us this evening and asked so many great questions throughout tonight's webinar. One of the questions that's come up repeatedly is, will I be able to access this webinar again? And the answer is yes. If you are a Stack MVP Plus member, then you will get access to this webinar and every webinar in our series completely free. So you will be able to watch John's presentation and any other presentation, including the one he mentioned with Dr. Stuart McGill, who's a renowned spine biomechanist, and other leading trainers, including Mike Robertson, Dean Somerset, and lots of other people that are worth your time just by being a member of Stack MVP Plus. If you are not a member of Stack MVP Plus, you can try it out for $1. That's right, for $1 you can get unlimited access to John's presentation and everything else in our library. There's also customized training plans. There is an entire community of coaches and trainers that you can access through our private Facebook group, and just so much more. So I'm not going to take up any more of your time telling you about that, because you guys have sent such great questions in for John, and I want to get to those straight away. So I wanted to ask you, this was a good question that came in toward the end of the presentation from Joseph. Why do you put so much emphasis on metabolic stress?
Metabolic stress is one of those things that hasn't been tapped into yet. And I feel like many athletes and even the general fitness population, they've plateaued their results. And it's something that we can place into programming because it is very, very well tolerated in terms of a joint perspective, but it's also something that is going to yield something that I really focus in on, which is trying to maximize functional muscle mass. And by maximizing functional muscle mass, we can really work to optimize people's body composition so we can lose more fat, we can be stronger, and we can actually develop more base strength. We can optimize movement, and we can really do it all in a very, very well tolerated manner. So it's something that even if you want to get down into the nitty gritty of it, we can actually increase tissue resilience using these metabolic stress schemes. And it's something that it's low hanging fruit right now. So a lot of the stuff that I talk about is things that is going to be more novel to performance programming, but at the end of things, it's going to be a very eclectic approach. And it's just another tool to place upon the tools that are already working very, very well for athletes and clients alike.
Now, speaking of tools, would you ever use Olympic lifts for metabolic stress? That's what Troy wanted to
know. That's a good one. So is that no, it does not fit those criteria that we went over in this presentation. So we need to have a spine-friendly positions to work metabolic stress out of, because our goal is to maximize tissue response while decreasing the amount of unwanted joint stress. And when we place things like velocity-based barbell movements and the Olympic lifts, it could be any velocity-based loaded movement. The first thing that's really going to kind of crap out on you is going to be your core stability and activation. And that's never a good thing when we're looking to really key in on tissue response while minimizing joint response.
Absolutely. One of Will asked, should I train for hypertrophy while I'm in season?
That's a good question. And hypertrophy is something that you can use in terms of a set rep rest scheme, but it's not something that you want to be crushing yourself with during season. So a lot of in-season training is based on maintenance. So we want to be maintaining power, we want to be maintaining strength, but we also need to be maintaining muscle mass because muscle is what drives body composition, and it's also what drives general health. So, using some metabolic stress, using some functional hypertrophy training-based schemes can absolutely be advantageous, but it's just going to be less of it than you would if it was in an off-season program. And it's just like anything else. You're going to do far less volume in your power work, far less volume in your strength work, far less volume in your skill work, and of course, far less volume with your hypertrophy work as well. But it is definitely a part of the program for off-season and in-season alike.
Now, what about the accentuated eccentrics? And by the way, I think one thing we're all wondering is 8-second squats, really?
So we use 8 seconds as like the absolute most that you'd ever be doing. The most recent research really says about 6 seconds is the best if we're looking at a training response. But because we do work with some athletes that are coming off of injury and they just need to work on their movement pattern development and really just kind of get better at moving better, we use up to 8 seconds. But I would say a vast majority of our programming is based off of 3 to 4 second eccentrics, because that's something that the accentuated eccentric is very novel to people that haven't used it before. And it's something that is going to be you're going to be desensitized to it if you use it too much, but you're also going to be sensitized to it if it's brand new to you. So around 3 to 4 seconds is something that you want to kind of focus in on. And again, we're not using this for every single movement. If we have 6 movements in the day and we have 24 movements in the week, maybe 2 to 3 movements are going to have the accentuated eccentric. And this is a good point that I'm not a big believer that you need to be counting the seconds on the eccentric, but rather you should know the approximate amount of time that it takes for you to really control the muscles through a full range of motion and keep tension through that eccentric motion, because that's what's going to optimize your movement patterns. So if you're you can only think about one thing at a time. So if you're thinking about 1, 2, 3, 4 as you go down, less emphasis is going to actually be placed on just having pristine looking movement.
One of our viewers named Armando asked if accentuated eccentrics to aid in recovery if you had maybe a muscle or a tendon tear or strain.
Yeah, so for recovery, I would say even like regeneration or rehabilitation, accentuated eccentrics could be amazing. And on the opposite side of things, metabolic stress. Both of these methods can actually help strengthen the tendinomuscular junctions where a majority of muscle tears and tendon tears actually happen. So by utilizing these two polarizing methods, the accentuated eccentrics and tapping into metabolic stress, we can actually work to increase the tissue resiliency, which is something that every single athlete and really every single person should be trying to key in on.
I'm just chimed in with a really great, and this is for an accentuated eccentric that's involving an injury. What percentage of a 1 rep max should somebody use?
So I like to introduce accentuated eccentrics with people from a feel-based movement, but also using those extended ramp-up schemes that we were talking about in the presentation. And it's hard to say because there's a couple different trains of thought out there that you could use, overload eccentrics. So supramaximal loading and lowering it slowly. So say like you can squat 300 pounds, but you're going to put 350 pounds on your back and you're going to lower it down to pins. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about manipulating the rhythm of the motion, the tempo of the motion, in order to go through all of the phases of movement. So making sure that you go through the eccentric, the amorphization at the bottom, the change between eccentric and concentric, and then coming up through the concentric, and doing that in the set and rep schemes that we talked about. So I think the slide said between 60 and 120 seconds of total time under tension for these accentuated eccentrics. So if you're using 3 to 4 seconds, that looks anywhere from about 10 to 15 reps per set. So it's not something that we are super maximally loaded, but it's something that's more of the feel of the tissues, and it's the feel of the motor control that you're using during the movements themselves.
One of our viewers, Megan, asked if you could produce hypertrophy by training with body weight and then maybe some cables.
I mean, anything's possible. We've had some interesting restrictions over the years. Training some athletes that travel all around the world, having different hotel gyms, and having to actually train in their rooms. But I would say anything's possible. But it always goes back to the foundations that we talked about today. Having a well-versed, eclectic approach to building the muscle. And I'd say, if you only had cables and body weight, you could easily, for just 20 to 40 bucks, get some bands, and you could have accommodating resistance at your disposal. And even dumbbells would be a good tool to throw into the toolbox as well. But it's all about tissue response. So hypertrophy of the tissue, as long as we get the type of muscular response that we're looking at, no matter what the tool we're using, we can get it done. And really, your body doesn't know the difference between having a barbell on your back, having a kettlebell in your hands, or having bands around your shoulders and doing a squat pattern. All it knows is its ability to stabilize and produce force against the resistance. So when you kind of think about it like that, you really know that anything's possible when it comes to performance and hypertrophy results.
Got a good question in here from Ryan, who just asked whether or not you have a specific time range that you recommend for cardio activity when you talk about the low impact long duration cardio.
That's a great question, because I think a lot of people either don't do any cardio or they totally overdo it. And when we program in, I like to have my athletes, especially the ones that are going to be competitive and are more serious with their bodies, completing those secondary, those recovery workouts that implements that low intensity, steady state cardio almost every single day of the week. And when you get to that list session, you're looking at anywhere from 15 to 45 minutes. And really, most people are going to be doing very, very well for themselves if they actually just do locomotive-based training for 30 minutes a day. And this doesn't have to be super complex stuff. A majority of our clients, they do their rolling, they do their stretching at home, and then they go out for a walk with the dogs. The type of heart rate response and tissue response we're looking at without tapping into the fight or flight response, that sympathetic nervous system, it's going to help expedite the recovery process. So I would say a bare minimum of 3 days a week, 15 to 45 minutes. And honestly, you could do it 7 days a week, as long as you keep the intensities down around where we talked about today. So a heart rate under about 120 beats per minute.
Very cool. Thank you for the insight. Freddie has been patiently waiting to ask you about band pulls or pull aparts. If someone has shoulder issues, is there another move that they can do that will help them get the same sort of effect in those moves specifically?
Yeah, so we use the band pull apart as one of the first things that we introduce with anyone that has past shoulder injuries or dysfunction. And I truly believe that the well-executed pull apart is going to be well tolerated by 90% of the people out there, even people, coming off the surgical table, or, throwers that have their arms carved up. So I think to answer your question, I would really key in upon the execution of the movement, because with anything, we need to be executing correctly. We need to be using the right range of motion. We need to have the right resistance band. We need to be really keying in on the right contracting musculature, and that's going to be really well tolerated. Once people get past the ability to execute those pain-free and actually get a tissue response from them, we go one step further and we start to implement the banded face pull apart, which is essentially combining the pull apart movement with the banded face pull. So essentially having a face pull, and then at the end range of that face pull with your elbows back, you're going to pull the band apart itself. And that's been a very, very effective movement for us as well.
Oh, hey, we're going to do 2 more questions, and then we're going to wrap this up for this evening. One of the last 2 questions comes from Logna, who asks, I increase day when I do an exercise?
You cut out, Brian. Can you repeat that?
Oh, I'm sorry. One of our viewers named Logna asked how much weight should they be going up from set to set or from week to week when they're training?
That's a really good question. And when you go back to our SMART training recommendations, it's all about having the confidence that you are not going to be missing a rep, but taking a grain of salt with that, because it's easy to move 2 pounds and make sure that you don't miss a rep. The key is to continuously, over a long period of time, not a short period of time, add load to your movements. And if that's something that takes you 2 to 3 months to add just a little bit of load to a foundational movement pattern, fine. You know, the myth of linear progressions of weights, it's just that. It's a myth. We're looking at long-term functional transference, and we're looking at staying healthy for the long term. So getting a weight where you can keep maybe 1, maybe 2 reps in the tank, and making sure that you actually push yourself a little bit out of your comfort zone to make sure that you actually use a load that's going to give you a training response, that's huge. But there's a fine line between going too light and then overloading and missing a rep. So that's really the reason that we use those extended ramp up schemes, because you can truly feel out the weights that you're using. So if you have 3 to 4 ramp up sets of a movement, you can really get a great feel by that last ramp up set what you're going to be capable of for your top end working weights. So I'd recommend using the ramp up schemes, using multiple ramp up sets, and then really just using a little bit of auto regulation and making sure that, you know, the feel of the movement day to day is exactly where you want it for the best result.
Great information. And hey, last question of the evening. John, if you could do just one exercise, what would it be?
Lately, it's been a really loving either box squat, bar deadlift. Either of those, I really like them from a pain-free training response, but there's something that you can go super hard, super heavy with and still come up injury-free. So it changes because we program for so many great athletes that we see different methodologies that we're using, different tools that we're using. I always kind of change every couple of months what my favorite is, but I guess that's a good thing.
Makes sense, though. Hey, Dr. Rusin, we very much appreciate your time this evening. And for all of you who have joined us, thank you for tuning in. My name is Brian Sabin on behalf of me and Stack's technical team and Dr. John Rusin. Thank you all so much. We hope to see you at our next workshop, which will be later this month and featuring Dan John. Take care, everybody, and we'll check in next time.